What's up guys, welcome to G Whiskey. My name's Jeff. Now this is the channel where I offer my thoughts, my opinions, and some scores on various whiskeys that I try. If that sounds interesting, hit subscribe down below. And with that out of the way, why don't we jump into our review? We're going to be looking at the Benromach 12-year-old Cask Strength today. Stick around. If you know Benromach, you know it's a very special case. It is a very unique distillery. It is a Speysider, but it doesn't really fit in with its Speyside counterparts. It's got a very special kind of profile. It's got a set of flavors that honestly would probably fit in better down in Campbelltown. Now, I'm not the first person to make this comparison, but a lot of people say that Benromach kind of hits like Springbank, and I tend to agree with that. It's got a very rugged character. Like Springbank, it's not a pretty whiskey. You have leather, you have tobacco, you have kind of like this rugged, farmy quality to it. It's not a pretty malt. And this is kind of a theory, but that might actually have something to do with why it's not as popular as some of those, famous Campbelltown malts. It's not a Springbank, it's not even a Glen Scotia. It's less widely discussed. And I think that's because if it were from Campbelltown, it'd do much better because that's kind of what you would expect. That's the kind of flavor profile you would expect. But as it is a Speysider and it doesn't really fit in with that kind of profile, it's not, a part of that community, at least not in terms of flavor. That might be the reason why it's not quite as popular, I feel, as it should be, could be. Anyway, it seems Benromach wants to change that. They want to update their look, they want to modernize, and that's why last year in 2020, we saw some rebranding from them. What they did is they repackaged their bottles. We have this new label, completely different look from their old labels. Their old ones, I think they were trying to be a little bit more edgy and modern, and I don't know. But with the new ones, it seems like they want to bring things back to basics. You have a very clear white label, clear writing across it, and it's a much more simpler look. It kind of reminds me of Benromach, actually. But beyond that, the whiskeys themselves didn't change. It's the same lineup, although they did add a 21-year-old to the lineup. But you're still getting the same stuff. It's still the same whiskey inside. Or at least it's the same whiskey with regards to your core range. Now, this is not going to be part of your core range. This one is, in fact, a Taiwanese exclusive. It's a combination from 19 different barrels. It's matured exclusively in first fill Oloroso sherry cask, so that's kind of cool. And you have your 12 years old and you have your cask strength. So pretty cool release. I did kind of want to share it with you even if you don't have access to it. And with that said, why don't you kindly leave a like and we'll hop into our review. So we've got a pretty hefty ABV here. It comes in at 57.8%. We have non-chill filtered and we have our natural color. So everything's good. So as you can see, our whiskey here is pretty dark. Not very dark, but quite dark. You can tell it's a very sherried whiskey. Beyond that, you have your new label. So this is the new look for Benromach. As I said, it came out last year. It really does remind me of Benromach. You have a white and red color scheme on this one. You have like a textured paper. And the label on the back is transparent, which is good because it lets us see the color of the whiskey. Now, I wasn't really a big fan of their old bottles. I do think this is an improvement. It's not a look that I love. It's not particularly special, but I do think it's a little bit better. So for presentation, I want to give this maybe 3 out of 5. Or I might even bump that up to 3.5 because one nice thing about this is that you do get all the information you need. It talks about the casks used. It tells you first fill. It gives you basically everything you need with regards to color, chill filtration. That's all here. There's not much fluff. There's not much nonsense. There's no stories or legends on here. I mean, you do have the ubiquitous finest oak casks, but that's fine. Beyond that, tasting notes, a few blurbs. I mean, it all works. Now for our nose here. Big, full nose. You have lots of sherry, orange peel, and it's classic Benromach, so you still have those rugged, manly notes like tobacco and leather, chocolate. There's definitely chocolate. I want to say like milk chocolate that's in here. You have some peat and some star anise. So interesting nose here. Now on the palate. I mean, it's not hot, but you can feel that ABV. This is a big whiskey, big arrival. I'm getting lots of chocolate, that chocolate from the nose, lots of that up at the front, followed by some peat, some dark berries, some tobacco, some anise in there, and some kind of like a spicy chili hit. So very big, very bold, but still quite rounded. Now for the finish. Okay, so again, kind of a continuation of the nose and the palate. The whiskey's not a straight line, but you definitely have that, continuation there. You have, again, big chocolate. That's very, very prominent throughout, nose to finish. There's chocolate just throughout this entire dram. You also have some ginger in here. In the finish, your sherry's getting a little bit more calm, and that peat and maybe that spicy chili kick, those get a little bit stronger, a little bit more to the fore. So it's big, it's rich, it's delicious, pretty long finish, really good. Now, as you know, this whiskey comes in at 57.8%, so it's not kidding around. Luckily, it's not too hot, it's not too harsh, it's not too rugged, and to be honest, that was kind of a concern of mine going in, especially considering my history with Benromach. I didn't love them back in the day, especially maybe 5-6 years ago. I found a lot of their stuff really harsh, a little bit too young, some of it, really rugged, a little bit pushy in terms of the flavor profile. I think this is probably one of my favorite Benromachs to date. I find the flavors much more settled in. It's a much rounder whiskey. The casks have worked some magic. The sherry's fantastic. And you still have that Benromach character, but it's more, I want to say, settled. Now, it's not a complex whiskey. There's basically just a handful of flavors driving this whiskey forward. But as I said, they're really well integrated and they're settled in together, so it really works. Now, that's not to say this has lost the Benromach edge. If you know Benromach at all, then you know that it's not a pretty whiskey. And yeah, this still isn't a pretty whiskey. But I do think it's a little bit more accessible. I think it's, I don't want to say smoother, definitely more rounded. And again, as I mentioned, settled in flavors. I think that's a good thing. I see it as an improvement. But, if you want classic Benromach, that's definitely not lost here. You still have rugged notes. You still have that farmy quality with your leather and your tobacco. All of that is still there. So yeah, I think they kept the flavors that they're known for, but they've become more accessible, at least in terms of this expression. I haven't explored the entire core range, but I do intend to. This has definitely piqued my interest. I really like this one. So for me, the score is 90. I think they've upped their game. I think they're doing better things, and I do think they're actually using better casks as well. So it's a really nice whiskey, and it's definitely one that I was surprised by. Now, there's one last thing I want to touch on before we move on to value, and that is the inevitable comparison to Springbank 12. Both 12 years old, both cask strength, both big peat, big sherry, and I'll say this in terms of quality, I think they're actually pretty similar. Definitely not identical, they're different whiskeys, but they both have a Campbelltown vibe, even though this one's a Speysider, and beyond that, I think they're both rugged and farmy and blah, blah, blah. So they have a lot in common. This one is going to have a little bit more chocolate, and I do think it's probably rounder and more accessible. Whereas Springbank, if you're looking for complexity, you'll probably find more complexity from the Springbank 12. So there are some differences for sure. But I can't say that I like this or Springbank better. I think they're about the same in terms of quality. I will say I probably reach for this one a little bit more. So score's better than Springbank even in terms of reachability, just because, as I said, it's more accessible flavors. So really, really cool stuff here. Now, there's one area where this cannot compare to Springbank, and that is price. This is absolutely absurd in terms of value. I don't usually go into specifics about price, but I will for this one. I paid 1,400 New Taiwan dollars, or NT, for this one. Now, that works out to about maybe 38 pounds, 50 bucks, around there. So really, really affordable. And for me, it tastes much more expensive. It tastes, as I said, on par with something like Springbank. So really delicious whiskey at a really great price. For me, this is one of my favorite value finds in recent memory. Now, I apologize if I'm ranting and raving about a whiskey that you have no access to. As I mentioned, this is a Taiwan exclusive, and with no one traveling these days, it's probably not something you'll have access to anytime soon, but I get excited when I have a find like this, and I do want to share it with you guys. Taiwan 朋友，如果你们看到这个，赶快去买。Alright, that's it for me today, guys. Thank you very much for watching. Do me a solid and hit subscribe down below, click that little bell icon, and smash the like. Also, I want to hear from you. You might not have tried this one, but have you tried the new Benromach core range? How do you feel about the new labels? Maybe you've tried the 21-year-old. Let me know if it's worth it. And finally, down in the comments, let me know what you'd like to see me review next, and I'll be sure to keep it in mind before my next video. Bye, guys.